This week on Cartoon Dumpster Dive, we talk to the creator of Gem and the Holograms, Christy Marx. What's going on, Joel?
What's up, Andrew?
Today, we're back from break. Kind of cut it a little short, although we didn't announce that we were taking April off, so there's that revelation.
Yeah. True.
But we have an interview with Christy Marx, and this is a Cartoon Dumpster Dive first. It's not our first interview, though. It will, however, be our first successful interview where you hear us and the person we're interviewing.
We've learned from our mistakes, Andrew.
Yes, pretty much. So, without enough waffling, here we go. Here's the interview.
Enjoy.
Hey there, everyone. It's Andrew and Joel here from Cartoon Dumpster Dive, and we have a special guest with us today. She has worked on such TV series, including Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Conan the Adventures of G.I. Joe, but most importantly, she's famous for creating Gem and the Holograms. We have Christy Marx with us here today. How are you doing today, Christy?
I'm doing pretty good. It's a fairly pleasant day here up in the mountains of Northern California, so enjoying that.
Well, good.
That sounds nice. That sounds absolutely lovely, actually.
Yeah. Yeah, better than the heat of South Carolina.
Yeah.
But of course, we've brought you here for an interview, just not idle chit-chat. Although I'm sure you're lovely to talk to outside of an interview. We have a few questions for you, if you don't mind answering them.
Go right ahead.
So the first thing that a lot of our fans wanted to talk to you about is we reviewed on a Patreon episode the live action Gem and the Holograms, which you've already stated multiple times you did not know it was happening until very late into the movie. And so you had like a cameo as a Rolling Stones writer. And I was just wondering, what's your version of Gem and the Holograms? Or would you been able to, like, if you had caught it early, would you have done anything to be like, hey, these are some ideas I have. Do you have what would they be?
Well, I actually spent years trying to convince Hasbro to reboot the series. Initially, I tried to get them to reboot it as an animation series, just continue it, but they just had no interest in talking to me at all. I did work with a couple of different producers over the years to try to come up with an approach to a live action movie. And I was always a bit stymied because there were basically two major directions you could go in. You either set it in the 80s and you just did the original series, a continuation of the original series, which would be fun. There's 80s nostalgia. And so, that could be fun. Or you do a complete reboot. You just try to bring it into the present, tell the same basic story, but bring it into modern times, modernize the technology, that sort of thing. And unfortunately, I never got to complete that work because of what happened with behind the scenes with the live action movie they ended up making.
Yeah. Did you ever write for the Rolling Stones?
Hasbro called me like the day before they were going to announce that the movie was going into production. That was the first I heard of it.
Jeez.
That's pretty crappy.
Yeah.
I was not happy.
I bet I would
put it mildly.
Let me ask. I read, I can't remember exactly where I read this, but apparently Hasbro, when they was, I guess decided to make a live action Gem and the Hologram series, apparently it was on the board. Either they was going to do a live action movie or a new animated series. Did you even know that aspect of it?
No, I would be really surprised if that's true. I'd be very surprised if Hasbro was giving any consideration whatsoever to an animation series. I mean, I ended up really liking John Cho and getting to know Chu and getting to know him, and that's why I actually agreed to do the cameos, just because I liked him so much.
Okay.
We ended up having a conversation, and then he flew me to LA and showed me what he had pitched to Hasbro and what he was trying to accomplish. And he was very sincere and very passionate. And so I ended up liking him, even if I didn't like the direction it went in necessarily, or how it got done. But I liked him a lot, and that's why I agreed to do the cameo. But he spent years trying to convince Hasbro to let him do a live action movie. I mean, he had a very, very hard time, an uphill battle to try to make it happen. And it really only happened because they got this super cheap $5 million budget. So, nobody was going to be out any money. They thought. So I would be very surprised if Hasbro had any genuine interest at the time in doing anything else with it.
Who knows? Maybe they will sooner or later.
It was one of those things, after watching that live action movie, it just made me long to have basically the old animated cartoon back in some new form, rebooted. But I feel like I feel like I'm just wasting my breath with that wish at this point.
Who knows? Anything can happen.
Anything can happen. So another thing I was curious about, I can't remember the exact number, but it's like in the hundreds of how many songs there are in the complete series of Jem and the Holograms. So did you write all of the, well, you did 23 episodes, so you wrote over half of it. Did you write the songs for your episodes, or was that someone else who wrote the songs?
Who did the music? Oh, no,
yeah.
I didn't. Music. Oh, yeah. No. They had both composer and also lyricist. Two composers in New York and lyricists in New York. I believe they're all in New York.
Okay.
And they, what I would do in the script and what the other writers would do in the script is that you'd have like maybe a small paragraph indicating here's where a song is going to go. Here's, basically the theme of the song, what it should be about. I would tend to put in something that they could springboard some lyrics off of, or some imagery, an idea of what I wanted to see in the images, and then the storyboard artist would then go off, of course, and create the storyboard for the music video, and then the composers and the lyricist would do all the rest of that in New York and put it all together.
Okay, that's so weird to me. That's just like, you're like, no, I didn't write them. Someone else did. And I just,
how can I? I don't do music.
yeah. I guess that makes sense now hearing it. It's like, I don't write music. I'm like, oh yeah, that's a whole different wheelhouse.
Oh, very much so. Yes.
Script writer, not a music writer, right?
Yeah, exactly. I have many talents, but writing music is not one of them.
I thought it was pretty interesting because when we actually did an episode on the actual cartoon of Jem and the Holograms, we talked about how it was just basically a toy line that Hasbro and I forgot the other one, Sunbow, I think, wanted to really just push. So that's when they brought you on to come up with a cartoon, correct?
Yeah. Now, Hasbro, of course, would create the toy lines. And then they hired this New York ad agency called Griffin Bacall. And those two guys created Sunbow Productions to do the actual animation, to produce the animation for it. So, so Hasbro is basically their client, and they were producing all of this for Hasbro. And that's how Sunbow Productions came about. And at first, of course, they did all the G.I. Joe stuff. And so there was already a very well-established relationship. And of course, I wrote for G.I. Joe, and they got to know me and they liked my writing. And so when Hasbro decided they wanted to take this doll line and also have Sunbow turn it into an animation series, it was rather natural for them to look around and go, okay, we want a female writer, a female person to develop this. And so they called, and I was in really good, good with them at that point. They really liked my work. So they turned to me, and that was how that happened.
How difficult is it, I guess, to come up with a entire, stories, different story arcs for a toy line?
Oh, I actually have done a lot of that, and it's a lot of fun to my mind, because I like world building and I love creating characters and so forth. I mean, obviously, I had the dolls, so I had to beg and beg and beg for them to send me some Polaroids of the dolls, because I'm a visually oriented person and I wanted to be able to at least see what these dolls look like to help me in visualizing this. And it was initially not a half-hour show. It was initially just excuse me, initially 15 6-minute segments. They ran in the middle of a half hour. There was a boys segment at the beginning. Jem was sandwiched in the middle, and a boys segment at the end. It called it Super Saturday or Super Sunday, depending on which market it ran in. And so there was this boy action thing, and then suddenly Jem would come on, and then be another boy action thing. And so, my guidelines were along the lines of, well, we want this to be, fashion and romance and glitter and all of that, but we don't want the boys. They figured the boys controlled the TV dial at the time. They didn't want the boys to change away from. So I had to come up with these enough action and cliffhanger endings to make sure that didn't happen, which is why when those all got repackaged into the first 5 half hours, you'll notice that every act break has a real hard sort of cliffhanger kind of a break on it. And that's why, because of that odd structure. But really, it's just a matter of saying, okay, well, I have these characters to work with, and they had product names, which kept changing all the time, except for a couple of them. Even Jem was not Jem originally. I mean, she was just called M, and then her other name was Misty, and then it was Morrigan. And I mean, they just kept changing things as I'm developing this. And it's a matter of saying, okay, well, I have these to work with, and I got to create their full identities, who they really were, what their relationships were, what they were about. Come up with the Eric Raymond, who I named after my brother, which he loves. He thinks that's wonderful being a villain. And, just coming up with who they are and what their relationships are. And you always have to have an interesting mix of relationships. So that's always in the back of your mind. And, overall, what were they about? And that's where I came up with the whole Starlight Music and the Starlight House and the girls that they're taking care of, because that gives them goals and purposes for what they're doing. It gives structure to the overall series. Plus, also in the back of my mind, plus there's young girls that girls watching the show could associate with when they're looking at the Starlight Girls. So I had all those things in the back of my mind when I was coming up with this whole stew, because they knew they had a rock singer and that she had some other identity, but there was nothing else. But to my mind, I thought, well, it would make a lot of sense for someone who's being a rock star for the other identity to also have some kind of connection to music or the music business. It just somehow, to me, it was logical to set it up that way, and everything else just sort of fell into place from there.
Yeah.
Okay.
I get, it sounds like to me you had a lot of freedom. It almost sounds like they gave you complete creative freedom to come up with the story of Jem.
They did give me a tremendous amount of creative freedom. Yes, I have to hand it to both Sunbow and Hasbro. They were wonderful about that.
I learned so much about writing today.
Have you ever, this is just a one-off quick question, but have you ever, I guess, had to work on a project where they almost just pigeonhole you? They want you to hey, you got to do this, you got to do that, you got to do this in your script.
I would say probably the worst example of that was the Deke version of G.I. Joe.
There's a Deke version of G.I. Joe. Oh, we gotta put that on our list.
Another series that an animation company called Deke did, and within the business, we jokingly would refer to Deke was spelled D-I-C, and I forget exactly what it actually stood for, but within the business, we would jokingly refer to it as "Do It Cheap."
We've covered a lot of Deke shows, and we We know.
Those,
We all
those shows really were restrictive. They were restrictive in like how many voices I could have.
Oh, wow.
You know, there was a restriction on the number of voices, and there's shows I worked on which there was a restriction on what backgrounds you could use. I mean, there's a lot of cases where you get those restrictions for budget reasons usually.
Yeah.
That one was pretty bad though, because they handed me episodes to do with like a big cast of characters. I forget. I sort of put it out of my mind what it was. But there was like this group of characters they wanted me to use in this episode, which used up almost all of the voices. And so then I'm sitting there frantically trying to come up with a way to tell this whole story with almost no other voices beyond the ones that I had to use.
It does not surprise me that Deke would be that one company.
Yeah, that is true.
They weren't the only ones.
But you can make fun of them the most in a way. So I wanted to know that you've written comics, some of your own, The Sisterhood of Steel, and also Red Sonja and Savage of Conan. So you're pretty deep, knees deep into like the nerdy zeitgeist. Was it hard for you to kind of get into that, for lack of a better word, male dominated like work, or did you find it easy, or were there some uphill battles for you to get into that?
Oh no, I grew up on comic books, and I could not wait to plunge into writing for comics and writing animation that was based on the comic book characters that I grew up on. I mean, I was just a rabid comic book reader.
And nobody was like, a woman? No.
No, I never did.
Really? Okay.
As a matter of fact, what I did encounter was that a lot of people that were kind of delighted that there was a woman writing this action stuff like G.I. Joe and so forth. And I worked with, great people. Like on G.I. Joe, I worked with Steve Gerber, who was just wonderful.
Okay.
I mean, you don't get much better than Steve Gerber. And he, he loved my work, and he was terrific to work with. And I guess, I don't know if I just got lucky or if it's just because I'm always been a fairly assertive and aggressive woman. I can tend to not really take shit from people. So
yeah,
maybe that's part of it too. But I don't know. I never really ran into any problems.
Okay. Well, that's good to know.
In that aspect of it.
Yeah. So I know that we spoke through email a lot, and you were like, well, you can't just talk about Jim. I've done other stuff too. But you didn't demand that. You just told me that, I worked on other things. And so you worked on Reboot and Beast Wars, and this is kind of a two-part question about the both of them. You're probably familiar with Transformers, so that was probably a breeze to, get into the world of that. But when you were writing Reboot, was the computer jargon kind of hard for you to pepper in, or was it like, no, I got it. I've done this for years. I got this down pat.
Yeah, that was no problem. I mean, my first computer ran on CP/M.
Oh, so you'd be real familiar.
And interestingly enough, when I was hired to write for G.I. Joe, Steve Gerber was way ahead of his time in terms of computers, and he required everybody to write for G.I. Joe using computers.
Okay.
And to use like blazing 300 baud modems to send scripts to the very first of the BBSs, the bulletin board systems and that sort of thing. So he was way ahead of the curve, and because of that, I ended up way ahead of the curve.
So you're like, no problem.
My first computer was a K-Pro 10, which was one of the first hard drives, 10 megabyte hard drive.
That's dealing with some power right there.
Oh, you're not kidding. Of course, I was up all night crunching to get the first G.I. Joe script done. And at that time, they ran to outrageous lengths, like about 65 pages, which you would never, ever see today on an animation script. And I had literally just finished the script, and the computer crashed.
Oh.
And so I'm running to the store that sold it to me in a panic, like, I've got to turn this script in today, So you managed to recover most of it, and I had to write the last few pages over again. But that's when I learned about that there was actually a way to save files.
Yeah.
Learned early on.
Yeah.
Those were the early days, let me tell you.
So when you I don't know if you saw it before or after you wrote it, but when you saw Reboot and Beast Wars, was that something that like blew you away? Or were you like, because when we covered them both, we were like, this did not age well. And it's rough CGI, but like when you saw it, like what did you think? Were you like, oh my God, this is the future of animation? Or were you like
back then, back then it looked really amazing.
Yeah.
Because there was nothing like it out there. So yeah, it did look pretty amazing. And you tended to excuse the rough parts because it was a new technology and it was developing. And you have to look at after Reboot, I wrote also from Mainframe Productions. I wrote called it War Planets, or released as Shadow Raiders. And that CG was just awesome. That was that series was amazing. And I loved writing for that series.
So we watched other interviews with you, by the way, to prepare for this, and you're a pretty big Marvel and DC fan. Are you interested at all in trying to write for the MCU or the DCEU?
Probably would if somebody came along and offered me something. I did write that Amethyst series for DC, and then the Birds of Prey, and then I did some other bits and pieces for them. Part of the Green Arrow, part of the Convergence series that they did, and some origin stories like for Poison Ivy and some other stuff.
Okay, but you should try to do Dazzler, the disco.
That'd be fun.
You'd be like, I wrote Jim. Come on, slam dunk. And if you do get it, all we ask is that like a cameo, shout out, just one, nothing big. You don't got to fly us out or nothing.
You just want to be mentioned.
I did write some stories for a digital comic book company called Interpop. That was just been around for the past couple of years, but unfortunately they have just shut down. So I won't be doing any more stories for them.
Are there any current projects that you're working on?
What I'm trying to do at this point is kind of stick to my own personal projects. I've spent my entire career writing for other people and doing all of this creative work and all of this development work and so forth for other people. And you don't own any of it. You don't control any of it. And I'm just kind of tired of that. So basically, I just want to work on my own stuff right now. And I'm mostly interested. The one thing I have not done, I've written nonfiction books, but I have never written a novel. So I'm extremely interested in getting a novel or two or three or whatever under my belt, while I still have time to do that.
What genre?
Oh, it would be either fantasy or science fictionally directed kind of fantasy. But I tend to be very much into fantasy realms, whether it's a pure fantasy or sort of techno sort of fantasy.
Well, if novels are anything like the podcasting world, you should definitely consider doing true crime. That's where it's at.
Let me ask you, Christy, if book wise, so if you're really into fantasy sci-fi books, what would be some of your suggestions? Because I'm actually at that spot. I finished up my most recent series of novels. I'm looking for another book to read. What would you suggest for me in those worlds of fantasy and sci-fi?
Well, I don't know your taste. I mean, I don't know what I could,
I guess that's right. I mean, I
have favorites, but they tend to be more woman oriented type of stuff. I mean, I love Patricia Briggs, her two different werewolf series. I absolutely, super sort of urban fantasy stuff. I love urban fantasy. I love the Dresden Files. I imagine you've read those.
I have not. What are they?
Jim Butcher's Dresden Files. Oh man, they're amazing. Yeah.
I've just really kind of started breaking out into like, reading more novels and stuff like that. So I'm trying to catch up on my, hey, these are the, must read sci-fi and fantasy books before you die, basically.
Yeah, I don't know if you like unusual, really way out there science fiction, but I just finished reading a trilogy by Greg Bear that was like very interesting. It's Legacy, Eon, and Eternity, and they're very interesting because they're just about as far out there in science fiction as you can get.
I just got done reading the Hyperion series from Dan Simmons.
Yeah.
That was really good. And then I just also got done reading Neuromancer from William Gibson, I think it was.
I actually met Dan Simmons because at one point Microsoft was going to try to turn Hyperion into a game.
Ooh.
And so they brought me up to meet with him and talk about the possibility of designing a game, writing a game based on that. But unfortunately, it never went anywhere.
Now, you've worked on a number of video games. You actually held a pretty high position with a video game company, correct?
Well, I started designing games for Sierra Online. That started back in 1988 when I first started working for them. And they were, it was the beginning. It was the frontier of doing video games. So
yeah,
nothing was terribly well established. And so they hired me to create the entire game. So I had to teach myself how to design a game and run the team and wrote everything. And so that was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed doing those adventure games mainly because I was in control and I could do it the way I wanted to do it. And I could make them story-driven games. I didn't, they had to have the game mechanics, obviously, but I could really drive the narrative and drive the story, which I did very much. In both of those games, I still get people writing to me all the time about those games, and they're still available on GOG.com. So people are still playing them.
Awesome.
So you also worked on Darkstalkers. Did you play Darkstalkers? Because it's like a pretty obscure Capcom fighting game. Or did you just
it was an arcade game, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was an arcade game.
Yeah, I never played arcade games. I wasn't into arcade games. So no, I didn't know it as a game prior to working on the animation series. So I had to become familiar with the characters, and a good friend of mine, Rich Mueller, was the story editor developer on that, and so he called me in, and I just had to learn the characters like I would for any other animation series that I'm not familiar with.
Did you try to read the video game manual like so many people didn't do when they had video games? They're like, okay, who is this?
If there was a manual, I don't know of it.
There might have, or maybe,
no, because what happens is when you're handed something like that to develop, you have your source material, but then you create a Bible, what's called a Bible, and you put all of the material that a writer needs to have into the Bible. So that becomes the source document for your writers. Like I had to do that for Jim and Bucky O'Hare and the Conan and the Adventurer, all of those things. Like for Conan, for example, I went back to the source material, meaning I went back to just Robert E. Howard's stories, read all of Robert E. Howard's stories, and drew all of my material just from the original source, and put it all together into a big Bible that had not only the characters and who they were and how they interact, but all the geographies and the territories and everything that the writers would need to know, so they could just go to that one source material and submit their ideas based on that.
Okay, yeah, for sure. So you didn't have to like sneak into arcade cabinets and just be like write down the side of the wall of the description of the characters.
Yeah, no, because that was all provided to me.
Yeah, they're just like, here you go.
Yeah, that's the way it works in live action TV as well as animation. So, you get that information, you get that material. There was one funny story that I remember Rich telling me about the character Felicia. She's covered in fur.
Yeah,
like fur, her whole body. She's like a cat woman.
Yeah.
And I sort of remember Rich, I hope I get this right, that Rich asking the Japanese that were behind, the Capcom people, why she didn't have a costume when she didn't wear some clothing. And her answer was like, well, she doesn't need it because she's covered all over in pubic hair.
Okay. Nice.
I think there was a slight vocabulary misunderstanding involved there, but
yeah.
Oh man.
Well,
that character just took on a whole new meaning.
That took on a big turn.
Yes.
And of course, in cartoon dumpster dive fashion, we can't have not mentioned furries in an episode, and she's like very big in their fandom. But
yes.
So this has been a very awesome time with you, Christy, and our time's almost up because I'm not paying for Zoom. But before we leave, do you have any advice for an aspiring writer?
Oh boy, I get asked this a lot.
Yeah, I can't imagine why.
Yeah. I'm going to have to shill my book.
Oh, perfect.
My book is called Writing for Animation, Comics, and Games. And basically what I did was to distill all of my experience and advice into that book. The second edition came out. So there's a second edition of it. And it's a craft book. It's not a book that's going to teach you how to write. I figure that's something you have to figure out on your own. But this will tell you everything you need to know about trying to write for those fields. What the script format is, how you put the script format together, what makes an animation script different, say, from a live action script, or what a comic book script looks like, et cetera, and so forth. And it's all kinds of advice on how to break in and just the basic functional stuff you need to know about trying to write for any one of those three areas of entertainment.
Awesome. Well, everyone who's listening, be sure to pick up that book and take a writing class. Pick up that book. Christy, thank you so much for joining us. I know that you're super busy and we're just some random cartoon podcast from the Carolinas, but I really appreciate you coming on and talking to us.
Yeah. Thank you.
Absolutely. Stay weird.
Yep. Good interview. I liked it when she said words. And because I don't remember what she said, but it was all very informative. I do, however, would like to say again, definitely buy her book if you're an aspiring writer. Other than that, that's a great way to support her. If you'd like to support us, you can go to patreon.com/cartoondd. There we have a $5 tier that gets you every sticker we've ever made, access to our Discord channel, and bonus content. We have a website, cartoondumpsterdive.com. If you'd like to request us to try to interview someone else, that is now an option, and we'll do our best. Requesting a cartoon is always the go-to, and of course we have Junkyard Brawl. We have a Twitter handle CartoonDD. We have a Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, all Cartoon Dumpster Dive. And of course, thank you for a 5-star review on the podcasting platform of your choice. It really helps out the show. Have a great rest of your week.
And see you. Oh, Christy, by the way, my name's Joel Swaney.
Oh yeah, you've been talking to me almost.
Yeah,
you've been talking to me exclusively. So,
hey, Christy.
All right.
You can call me as we like to say here in South Carolina. You can call me whatever you want. Just don't call me late for dinner.
I'll call you late for dinner. There's a famous Groucho Marx line about that too.
Yeah.
This has been a Lug Hole podcast.